promises were made to those workers that when they got old, they would have a pension. And years ago, Congress reneged, broke that promise. And I'm happy to tell you we have restored that promise to those workers. The senior senator from the state of Vermont, Mitch McConnell, is not just Kentucky's senator. Until a few months ago, as you all know, he was the majority leader of the United States Senate. And my God, I am so delighted that today he's only the minority leader. And by the way, we owe that to two great Senate candidates in Georgia. And what they did in Georgia, you could do in Kentucky. But Senator McConnell remains today, as minority Republican leader, the highest-ranking Republican elected official in the country, a man with enormous power. And what I want to do now, which I think as a nation we don't do enough, is to simply compare Senator McConnell's ideology, his Republican ideology, his votes, his actions, and his vision for America with the progressive vision for America. And our vision is that the government should represent all of the people, not just the 1%. Our vision believes that the foundations of government should rest on the pillars of justice, economic justice, racial justice, social justice, environmental justice. That's what we believe. And in order to make an effective comparison between Senator McConnell's views and ideology and ours, let me begin by telling you what you already know. And that is that we are living today in an unprecedented moment in American history, a moment that our children and grandchildren will be reading about in their history books. We have, as a people, endured the worst public health crisis in more than 100 years. We have lost almost 600,000 fellow Americans in every state in this country, and many millions more have become ill as a result of the COVID virus. We have experienced during this period, this last year, the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression of the 1930s. We have seen during this last year millions of Americans marching in the streets to end systemic racism and police brutality, something that, unfortunately, the people of Louisville are more than familiar with. We continue during this moment in world history to confront the existential threat to our planet of climate change, with the future of the planet and the lives of our children and grandchildren hanging in the balance. And then on top of all of that, we have lived through a violent insurrection in the nation's capital against our democracy, and we are seeing today a strong right-wing movement toward authoritarianism. That's the moment that we are living in. Today in Kentucky, in Vermont, and throughout our country, over half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. This is the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, yet half of our people are working so hard, and at the end of the week, they've got nothing to show for it. And we got millions of other people in Vermont and Kentucky who are working for starvation wages. And on top of all of that, we have over 90 million of our people who are uninsured, who are underinsured, and cannot go to a doctor when they get sick. And 1 out of 5 Americans, unbelievably, cannot afford to purchase the prescription drugs their doctors prescribe. How insane is that? Despite an extremely competitive global economy, hundreds of thousands of working class young people are unable to afford college, and many millions more are struggling with outrageous levels of student debt. In America today, as we speak, well over 500,000 of our fellow citizens are homeless, sleeping out on the streets. Gentrification is sweeping the country, driving working class people away from the neighborhoods they grew up in. 18 million households are spending 50% or more of their limited incomes on rent and mortgages. And millions of other Americans are worried about being evicted and thrown out of their apartments or their homes. Unbelievably, in the United States of America during this last year, we have seen working families all across this country, including my own city of Burlington, Vermont, waiting in car lines for emergency food packages to feed their families. It was really stunning to me. Within a mile of where I live, long line of cars of people who have never been in this position before, having to get emergency food packages to feed their kids. In terms of education, millions of our young people, including my 7 grandchildren, have been forced to miss class because of the pandemic and the unprecedented disruption of education in this country. And think what that means to the young people, not only in their loss of academic credit, but in their isolation, their inability to be with their friends. And a lot of kids are suffering today in so many ways because of that. And let's be frank, this past year has been by far the worst and most painful year in the modern history of our country. That's been the simple reality. But in the midst of all that, another point that I want to make to you, it's important that you know this, is that not everybody has been hurting in this country. While tens of millions of Americans have been living in economic desperation, the wealthiest people in this country have become obscenely richer. And it's important that we understand that. During this horrific pandemic, 650 billionaires in America, that's not a lot of people. It's less than the number of people probably who are here right now. 650 billionaires have seen their wealth increase by more than $1 trillion. And again, we don't talk about this for obvious reasons. You don't talk about it in the media. We don't talk about it in Congress. But we have a worse level of income and wealth inequality today than we've had since the 1920s. In America today, 2 people now own more wealth than the bottom 40% of our nation, while the top 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 92%. Got that? 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 92%, and that gap between the very, very rich and everybody else is growing wider. Brothers and sisters, this is a pivotal moment in American history, and the decisions we make now will impact the future of this planet and the future of our kids and our grandchildren. In the coming months, we have a fundamental decision to make. We have it to make it in Congress. We have it to make it in Louisville, in Burlington, all over this country. Will we create a government, an economy, and a society that works for all of us and not just the 1%? Or will we continue the drift toward oligarchy and authoritarianism, in which a small number of incredibly wealthy and powerful billionaires own and control a significant part of the economy and exert enormous influence over the political life of our country? That is the fundamental question of our time, and you and I know how we've got to answer that question. I'm here in Louisville today not just because Mitch McConnell is a Republican or the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate. I'm here today because Mitch McConnell is working overtime to represent the needs of the wealthy and the powerful and to undermine the needs of working families. To undermine the needs of the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. Now, I'm proud to tell you that as chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, I worked hard with President Biden and the Democratic leadership to pass the American Rescue Plan. And as you know, that legislation provided $1,400 in direct payment to every working class adult in this country and their children as well. And I want you to think about it, because the rich may not appreciate it. You know, if you got millions of dollars, what's a few $1,000s? But if you are a struggling family in Kentucky or Vermont, and you got 2 kids, and you got a check for $5,600 in the middle of an economic downturn, that means a lot. That's life and death. And I'll tell you what else we did. For too many years, we have ignored the plight of children in America. Every American should be embarrassed that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. Disgraceful. This legislation will cut childhood poverty in half in America. And we do that by providing a tax credit of up to $3,600 that is directly benefiting over 1 million children in Kentucky alone. That legislation that we passed, the American Rescue Plan, is substantially reducing hunger in America. It is providing an extra $300 a week in unemployment benefits to more than 100,000 Kentuckians alone who have lost their jobs through no fault of their own. That legislation is preventing millions of families from being thrown out of their homes and onto the streets. And I am proud to tell you that the American Rescue Plan is preventing over 24,000 coal miners and Teamsters here in Kentucky from seeing their pensions slashed by up to 60%. Promises were made to those workers that when they got old, they would have a pension. And years ago, Congress reneged, broke that promise. And I'm happy to tell you we have restored that promise to those workers. I'm happy to tell you that we doubled funding for community health centers all across this country. We tripled funding for after-school programs and summer programs for the kids. And much, much more. I'm proud of all of that. Very proud as chairman of the Budget Committee. But what I am not proud to tell you is that Mitch McConnell led the effort against that bill. And not only voted against it, he was able to convince every Republican in the Senate and the House to oppose it. We passed that bill after 16 hours of debate at 5 o'clock in the morning, when Vice President Harris cast the tie-breaking vote. And I want the American people to remember, when they hear some Republicans touting this or that part of the American Rescue Plan, not one Republican voted for it. We did it alone. And let's be clear, it's not just the American Rescue Plan that Mitch McConnell opposed. As we speak, Senator McConnell is leading the effort against the long-term structural changes that working people in Kentucky, in Vermont, and throughout our country desperately need. He is leading the effort against raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. He is leading the effort against universal child care, paid family and medical leave, and making it easier for workers to join unions. He is leading the effort against H.R. 1, legislation fundamental to preserving our democracy,